Hi everyone and welcome to Deep Geek Live. I have got a very special guest on today. He is one of my favorite people in the community. He's been on here many times before. He will be on here many times in the future, I can assure you. He is one of the people who I like the most and has certainly got the finest beard in the community. Could you please give me a very warm welcome to Kyle. Kyle, do you want to say hi?
Hey everyone, I'm wearing my festive Ho Hodor shirt, not because I believe that the holidays are still going on, but because I'm in the middle of a polar vortex. So hello everyone, I'm freezing to death here in the lands of always winter, but nonetheless, I've come to warm you with my warm disposition.
Awesome. So, guys, we've got an amazing topic as well today. We're going to be talking about prophecy. We're going to be talking about it in quite a big way, as well as getting down into details of some of the very specific prophecies we have in A Song of Ice and Fire. As always, what we're going to try and do is we've got a whole load of questions from my patrons. I always say to my patrons over on Patreon, have they got any questions? And I try to make sure that I cover all of them. If there's any super chats, we'll come to them as well, and as much as we can from the chat as we're going through. But I wanted just to say a big thank you, first of all, to Maura Lee, who I know is in the chat there. Maura, you did an amazing amazingly generous super chat just before we went live, and another one just a few moments ago saying, for Robert and Kyle, just a show of continued appreciation for all the passion and hard work that you both put into creating excellent content for us all to enjoy, both on Patreon and YouTube. And I know I speak for Kyle as well as myself, just humbled and incredibly grateful for your support. It is amazing, so thank you so much.
We are lucky little shits, Robert.
And your second super chat was saying this was for Chrissy and Jojo Lady Dane, who are my two excellent moderators there. So guys, please do give them a little bit of appreciation. And Chrissy and Jojo Lady Dane, I will message you probably tomorrow, and we'll sort out, try and make sure that you get a little bit of the morally love coming at you. So we also had some super chats from Charlotte Colness, saying, hi, I've already written up my question on Patreon, so I'm sure we'll get to that in just a moment. Love your channel, keep up the excellent work. Thank you so much, that's incredibly generous. And then anime lover Nicole, who also put a question over on Patreon, saying, hi Robert and Kyle, thanks for being my lullaby. I'll rewatch tomorrow morning as always. So thank you guys, that's amazing. Oh, and we had another one, in fact, I've just spotted scrolling through from...
You may break a record here, Robert. Like this is insane. That's like almost 200 pre-stream.
Well, I'm incredibly grateful, guys. This is wonderful. Marvin Martin, thank you so much. Prophecy is message from divine to human mind. Human mind is affected by divine presence, and human interprets based on personal bias and best story. So I'm going to say thank you for that. That's a really interesting take. I think what we'll do is we'll start off by looking at what prophecy is. Is it real? Can we trust it? And I've got a few questions. I'm going to throw all of this first to Kyle, because I know, Kyle, you've been thinking about this a little bit through the stream. Maura Lee asked, quoting the Tyrion thing, is one of my favorite quotes from A Song of Ice and Fire, saying, prophecy is like a half-trained mule. It looks as though it's useful, but the moment you trust in it, it kicks you in the head. Brian Price quotes Preston Jacobs, who's another YouTuber who does a lot of theory videos about A Song of Ice and Fire, who has got a long-held belief that prophecy is all, I won't use the exact word, but and so any thoughts on that? Jack Hurst also said, quoting, prophecy is like a treacherous woman. She takes
Robert, let's go. Actually, I wanna actually.
You're gonna jump in straight away, are you, Kyle?
Yeah. Is prophecy important, Robert? Yes and no. So we're going to talk a few different references from George R.R. Martin here, and kind of what I think about it and you think about it, right, Robert?
Yeah, go for it.
So prophecy does not need to be fulfilled in some spectacular way in order to be true. George R. R. Martin once mentioned an interesting historical preference that basically summed up his attitude towards prophecy. A knight was told that he would die at a certain castle. The knight took great pains throughout his life to avoid that castle because he thought if he went there, he thought he would die. The knight eventually died outside of a tavern that shared the name of the castle or had a painting of the castle on the sign. So that's pretty interesting. This person basically made it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. Robert, would you say that that's accurate?
I don't know whether it's self-fulfilling prophecy or merely literary irony, I would have to say.
Now, what we heard about earlier, prophecy is like a treacherous woman. She takes your member in her mouth and you moan with the pleasure of it and think, how sweet, how fine, how good is this? And then her teeth snap shut, ouch, and your moans turn to screams and prophecy will bite off your prick every time. So interesting that George says this. I'd actually like to use a reference from a show I literally just started watching yesterday. And I don't know if many of you are familiar with The Man in the High Castle, written by Philip K. Dick. It's about Nazi America and basically how I don't want to give away too much of the story, but basically a different future where the Nazis win and some other things happen. But there's a character that has a really, really interesting thought in relation to what I just spoke of. And he basically says to this Nazi character who doesn't believe in the Reich anymore, fate is fluid and that destiny is in the hands of men. So we gotta remember that foreshadowing and prophecy are two different things, Robert.
They are. I mean, I think that what we're talking about. So we've got a number of those quotes, and I think that what they are bringing out is the fact that we shouldn't take prophecy as literally true. In the same way that you get some fantasy novels where there's a prophecy and that has to come true. I think what the characters here, the quotes that we're drawing out, are showing that within George R. R. Martin's world, this is not just a prophecy happens and everything kind of follows on from that, and it's just it will end up in the same way because of it. Sometimes prophecy is true, sometimes it is not. The point that I always come back to on prophecy is that actually what George R. R. Martin is trying to show us is that it is how people react to prophecy that matters. It's how they respond to it. It's Cersei's response to the Valonqar prophecy. It's Melisandre's response to the Azor Ahype prophecy. These are the things which drive the action, and they are actually more important than whether or not the prophecy is true.
I got another quote from George R. R. Martin, actually, Robert. Prophecy is one of the tropes of fantasy that is fun to play with, but it can easily turn into a straitjacket if you're not careful. One of the themes of my fiction since the very beginning is that the characters must make their choices for good or ill, and making choices is hard. There are prophecies in my 7 kingdoms, but their meanings are often murky and misleading, and they seldom offer the characters much in the way of useful guidance. Like you spoke of earlier with Cersei, Robert, Cersei's arc is a great example. She worries about the Valonqar, who she thinks is Tyrion, and that Tyrion will kill her. And you know, all she really does is actually make Tyrion want to kill her. So it's kind of interesting that that's going on. And you know, I think it's really interesting that George says this, because he said it can be fulfilled in unpredictable ways. And you know, he has many red herrings throughout the story, Robert. He's trying to lead us in many different directions, trying to make us understand many different things and understand the viewpoints of our characters. So some of it is plot devices, and some of it is for a much bigger reason.
Absolutely. And Jack Hurst, thank you so much. I was just we were just quoting from your Patreon question there a moment ago. I'll pick up on that in just a second. But thank you so much, £10 for the super chat. Just wanted to say how great this community is. Heartily agree. I only just started watching live streams around October, but I've never heard a shred of animosity from anyone. Nothing but love. Thanks for all the great content. Jack, thank you so much. That's incredibly kind.
Jack also has a beard and looks like a handsome gentleman himself.
He is, but not a patch on you, my fine friend. Jack's the last bit of Jack's Patreon question was about Rhaegar. Was there a specific prophecy that effectively, in the language of here, bit off Rhaegar's prick? Was this the bit that was there anything that Rhaegar was following? And this actually, Nicola Jurican, just before the live, we went live, also asked in the chat about, is there anything, did prophecy lead to Rhaegar's death? What do you think, Carl? Was him following prophecy actually the end of him?
You know what's really interesting, Robert? Would you say that any of these prophecies have necessarily been proven wrong? A lot of them haven't, right? So it's really interesting how each one applies to each different character. I'm not saying Rhaegar was right, but I mean, it's certainly interesting. Depending on where he heard it from, there's obviously many different angles to look at. Some people think it was Bloodraven, which would make some sense. Some people think he found the book Signs and Portents, Robert, if that's what it was called, Signs and Portents. What are your thoughts on it? I don't necessarily think that Rhaegar was necessarily wrong.
Well, Rhaegar's interpretation of prophecy, in my view, was wrong in almost every way, because he contradicted himself to start with. He thought that the prince that was promised was him, and then he thought it was his son Aegon. He can't have been right both times. He was probably wrong both times. He thought that his third child would be a daughter, as far as we can tell. He was clearly wrong about that. So there are huge amounts of things that he did get wrong. What the issue here is that this always comes back to what actually did him in was his absolute belief in his own interpretation of prophecy. That was the thing that was his Achilles heel, was that if he'd accepted the fact that the prince that was promised was a completely true prophecy, then that was one thing. But it was the fact that he thought it was a completely true prophecy and it applied directly to him or then to his son. And those were the things which actually did him in, not his belief in the prophecy in a generality. But can I just take you on to another question from one of my patrons? Karis the Beast asks, can you cite, and this is a really interesting question, can you cite any examples in the story where prophecy worked out to someone's advantage? Do you think, Kyle, to sort of reframe this a little bit, do you think that prophecy always is leading to bad decisions or bad things happening?
I mean, that really depends on like how good the person is, Robert, like what kind of man or woman they are, right? So doesn't that matter more?
Yes, it does.
But I see what you're saying. Prophecy could make them act differently because of what they're interpreting through their own perspective, which is we all interpret or absorb information differently and understand it differently. So
yeah, I mean, I think
that's complicated.
It is complicated, and I think for me this boils down to can people interpret prophecy in such a way as it helps them, or is it often or always worded and phrased in such a way that it does not? We saw with Melisandre's absolute belief clearly has many negative consequences.
Stannis Baratheon is another example.
Exactly. I mean, so when we get the Valonqar prophecies, which we'll get onto in detail in just a second, that Cersei clearly, her actions as a result of that do not lead to good things. The question is, has it ever led to good things? My take is that yes, perhaps or potentially, when you go to someone like Quaithe, who's talking to Dany, sort of astrally talking to her in a way, and she gives her a series of warnings about characters. Now, on a very plain text reading of those warnings, they're mostly reasonably easy to interpret and actually probably mostly understandable. She seems to be warning about Victarion. She seems to be warning about Varys and a number of other people. And whether or not we agree that those people, the kinds of people Dany should be wary of, actually, it's probably quite a good thing, and she could at least interpret that in a good way and actually steer clear of those people when she comes into contact with them. So that for me is an example of potentially a prophecy being good. And in another example, perhaps with Dany being in the House of the Undying, there are a few examples there of things that might help her, like seeing the vision of the wall of ice with the blue flower growing out of it. And if she correctly interprets that, then that is probably going to be quite a positive thing for her.
Well, the interesting thing about Quaithe is that there's lessons, is what she's saying. You must go backward to go forward. How can we interpret that, Robert?
Well, like, this is the thing about one, and there's so many things about prophecy. This is another thing about prophecy, is that they are often very hard to interpret. And my take on this is that lots of prophecies, in fact, I would say the majority of prophecies, you only know the truth of them looking back. This is particularly true of the characters in there. But also, I think a bit true for us is that we see what somebody says and go, well, that kind of makes sense, but it's only afterwards we get, and particularly they get that kind of aha moment and they understand exactly what it is.
Double-edged sword.
Exactly, but so I think it's so like the Valonqar. How useful is that at the moment? Well, not really, because as we'll get onto in a moment, you could interpret it in any one of many, many ways. Looking back, I suspect if it comes true, we'll be able to say, oh, yes, of course, that makes sense of that prophecy. But here in this moment in time, looking at it, it doesn't necessarily make sense. It only makes sense looking backwards at it from the perspective of the event actually happening. Did that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does, and there's so much gasoline in the chat right now, man. Like this is such a great subject to discuss because there's not really a right or wrong answer at the current moment. You know what I mean? Because at the end of the story, I think that we'll understand what George was actually really trying to tell us. Obviously, well, more of it, maybe not all of it, but yeah, there's some really good comments from chat, Robert. Should we bring some of those up as well?
Yeah, by all means. Do you want to just pick out a couple of things for us to go with there?
Andrew Case, in the books, George R. R. Martin's description of what Mel physically sees is definitely abstract and confusing, plus own biases factor in. So misinterpretation is possible. Definitely agreed there. There's people talking about Nostradamus as well, which is interesting, where George might have pulled his influence on how to write specific prophecies is really interesting as well. Like, why? I think a really interesting question for Chad is, why is George specific prophecies? Why is he why is he writing them the way he does? What is he trying to make us understand? What is the point of it? You know what I mean? Because ultimately, behind each one, there's a point.
Yeah, and I think what I would add to that is that clearly magic is real in the world of Planetos. Magic does exist. So people do have true prophecies. And so when we get things like Daenerys the Dreamer, the Targaryen who prophesied about the doom of Valyria, that was a real vision of the future. Similarly, we get a lot of the stuff that we see, say, in the House of the Undying, that is also true in a very real sense and understanding what it is. But it's not always exact. It's not a bit of prose saying this is going to happen, therefore you should do this. That's not how it works. It's often a picture. It's something that you can see, something you can feel, and that is not necessarily, and so it's going to be very clear. And so you are, as was it Andrew Kay in the chat was saying, you are very much dependent on the who is doing the interpreting. And so Melisandre takes her own biases from where she is into the interpretation. And so it is the strength of personal belief in a character that actually leads to what they do with that prophecy, because it's the how strongly do they believe that they are absolutely right about it.
It's predictive, right, Robert? It leads to what ifs, the future, focusing on the future, and a lot of what's going on in A Song of Ice and Fire is happening in the now, yet it's being ignored, right? So, for example, I want to use this example for myself. I am someone that's constantly being pulled in two different directions by the universe. I'm trying to forget some of the things in my past, failures and mistakes, yet they still might be useful. And I'm also focusing on the future and future goals, and worrying and stressing about certain things that I want to accomplish. By looking back at things and also worrying too much about the future, I'm not necessarily focusing on what's important right now, Robert, right? So I think that that's kind of an interesting that we have to look at as well, is some of these characters are not focusing on what's really important right in front of them.
Absolutely, I agree. Let's move this on to the Valonqar prophecy. So we've had a few comments and questions from my patrons on this. The main one, which we'll get onto just 1 second, is who might be the Valonqar. But Anime Lover, I'll just quickly pick up on this one first. Anime Lover and Nicole saying, asking about Maggy the Frog herself. Apparently she's from Essos, but she sounds more like the Children of the Forest with her sight and yellow eyes, or the fact that she needs blood. So I'll quickly pick up on that one first. The blood thing seems to be about the fact that magic needs sacrifice. Every bit of magic has a cost. That seems to be one of the laws that we have in this universe that George R. R. Martin has created. Absolutely. So, and incidentally, I did a really good. I had a really good chat with. I think it was on Between Two Weirwoods over on LML's second channel with him and Amanda Crowfood's daughter and Joe Magician. We were talking about the mechanisms of magic, and one of the clear mechanisms of magic that we can draw out here is this idea that every bit of magic has got a cost. So that was where the need for blood came from, in my view. In terms of the idea that she might be sort of a descendant of the Children of the Forest, I actually agree here. I do wonder. So Maggy the Frog, to me, it's speculation based on the name. Maggy is a kind of a play on Magi. The frog, for me, Frogman is a derogatory term for people from for Crannogmen, for people from the neck, and it is strongly rumored, and I suspect it's right, they have some history of intermarriage with the Children of the Forest way back in time. So for her to be called Maggy the Frog implies that perhaps she's got some Crannogmen hereditary within her, and that may therefore show through her magic that she's got. But that's just a little bit of speculation on that. Kyle, if you want to talk about that, please do. But what I'd be really interested in is a couple of other questions we've got, which is, Bonds was saying, well, can I just hold on one moment? I just want to get where my patrons were saying. So Bonds was asking whether Jon Snow could be the Valonqar, saying he's the younger brother of Aegon Targaryen. And Maura Lee was asking whether or not Jaime or perhaps Arya could be the Valonqar. So do you want to just pick up on, if you want to pick up on the idea of who Maggy the Frog is, that's great. But also, who do you think the Valonqar might be?
I don't think who Maggy the Frog is necessarily that important, Robert. So we'll just sidetrack that for a second. Let's get straight to more Leash question of Jaime or Arya being the Valonqar. I think those are actually the two best candidates, with Jaime being the absolute best candidate. We spoke of earlier, what you spoke about, Robert, that Cersei believes the Valonqar is Tyrion, right?
Cersei does, yeah.
She worries that the Valonqar is Tyrion, that Tyrion will kill her, and as a result, she is more cruel and merciless towards him. So, it gives Cersei blinders, because she's been able to manipulate Jaime, because she knows how much Jaime loves her for real. She doesn't. I don't. Would you say that Jaime and Cersei's love is equal? Do they love each other as, like, Jaime loves Cersei more than Cersei loves Jaime? Correct.
No, I wouldn't say so, but I would say it's different. I would say that Jaime is obsessed with Cersei, and Cersei, I think it's one of those things where, yes, she uses Jaime, but it's absolutely fundamental to her concept of who she is, that they came into this world together, they will leave this world together. She sees them as two parts of each other. So it is love, but it's quite a twisted sort of love. It's different.
I think that, I mean, most people that I speak to, like content creators like me and you, Robert, is that, like, I think that Jaime Lannister would be the front runner, right? Because for Jaime to come full circle, let's hypothetically say that Cersei somehow gets the Iron Throne in the books as well, or in some position of power, and she starts to do stuff like the Mad King, right? This would be a repeat scenario where we see history repeat itself. George loves to do this within Song of Ice and Fire, and it would make sense if Jaime would have to put himself in a situation where he has to kill someone that he loves, like he did with the Mad King. He didn't care about the Mad King. He didn't like the Mad King. This situation, however, is different, because he did kill the Mad King for the right reasons, but this time he has to make a sacrifice, duty or love, right? The thing that Maester Aemon talks about. So I think that Jaime Lannister certainly is the best candidate for killing Cersei. I actually think he's going to kill Cersei, somehow be mortally wounded, or sacrifice himself in some sort of way shortly thereafter, maybe like 10 minutes after. I think they're both going to die. But Arya, certainly, show version, I think that Arya has a much greater possibility in the show to kill Cersei. Those are kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't disagree too much. I think that I've done videos on this in the past. I think that in the books, Jaime's character arc takes him around to killing Cersei to save King's Landing. I think that's a really strong character arc for him, and also for Cersei. And it adds, I mentioned a moment ago, to this idea of her and him both saying, we entered the world together, we will leave the world together. This seems to work very well there. I think in terms of second favorites, I have two. I think Arya, you may well be right on the money in terms of the show. I could certainly see her doing it, because let's not forget, Cersei is on her list. Arya will try to kill Cersei. There's no doubt about that. That's something she's going to try and do. I love the idea. I don't know whether it will happen, but I love the idea of her putting on a Jaime mask to do that. That kind of works for me. But finally, the other one is Euron, who seems slightly a left field answer, but I had Grey Area on this channel. We did a sort of a pre-record video. If you want to check out her theory on why it's Euron, please do go and check out. It's somewhere down in my channel if you want to go and look for it.
Robert,
something like is Euron the Valonqar?
I don't want to discredit Grey, but she has a great theory on that. I just don't think Euron is a possibility at all. But I will throw some show tinfoil out there. How about that Chamber Maiden that we saw a few different times, the one that witnessed Sansa's period and also witnessed Cersei and Jaime in bed? Let's say Jaime Lannister somehow dies and then Arya would have the free road to go kill Cersei. She could cross off that name off her list. I think that if it's going to be Arya in the show, I have a sneaking suspicion that she's going to take the face of that woman.
That's very possible. I think the show and the books will be different on this. Is where I'm going to go.
Definitely, 100%.
Let's quickly pick up on a few super chats. Marvin Martin, thank you so much. Saying prophecies make you feel in control of God's will, but if an imperfect Lovecraft being with enemies, then their planned vision of fate is not set. Yeah, I think that for me this is quite crucial. Is that the idea is that prophecies make you feel like you're in control because you are running with this. It's not just a matter of the world is out there and outside of your control. This is you being in charge. Linda Presuta, $25. Thank you so much. As Arthur Dayne was an amazing swordsman, why would he tell Ned, "I wish you good fortune in the wars to come," like he knew he was going to die? Do you think he knew more prophecy than was let on? This is a great question. I will answer this one. Kyle, if you want to chime in afterwards, if you've got any thoughts on this one.
My simple answer is no. So I have a two-letter answer.
No, okay. Well, my take is that I will be doing in 2 videos time on my big series I'm doing of videos at the moment looking at Robert's Rebellion, the Tower of Joy. I'm going to be looking at the Tower of Joy in detail, what I think happened there. So I'm going to give a full answer to it there. But in terms of why he said, "I wish you good fortune in the wars to come," this, first of all, is in a fever dream from Ned. So we shouldn't necessarily take it as literally true. We'll pick up on fever dreams in a second here. But do I think he knew more prophecy than he let on? Yes, I think he did. We don't know huge amounts about Arthur Dayne. We don't actually meet him properly at all through this series or through the books. He was Rhaegar's closest friend. He was hanging around with him all the way through this. They went from Dragonstone, eventually up into the Riverlands, back down to the Tower of Joy. He was there with Rhaegar all the way through it. He knew and stood by Rhaegar all the way through Rhaegar's theorizing about what would happen. This line, for me, is the biggest hint that Rhaegar was convinced about the others returning, and he was trying to set up the defense force through the prince that was promised. So that was there, but it also hints at the fact that I think that Arthur Dayne knew that he could not survive the Tower of Joy. I will come into detail in the video about why I think that is, but I think that is clear to me that he knew that he couldn't carry on. Now, so there's 2 elements to that one. Did he know more prophecy than he let on? Well, he didn't let on huge amounts because we've not seen him huge amounts, but he was part of that central cabal. He was with Rhaegar, and he agreed with Rhaegar with what Rhaegar was thinking. So that's my answer to that one. We had another couple of super chats. Let's quickly pick up on Donna Daly. Thank you so much. £5. We always assume that Rhaegar and Cersei are wrong about everything. We do, don't we? Could George be using this to get us to dismiss obvious answers? Kyle, let's as you ducked out of the last one, do you want to have a first bash at this one? Do you think that Rhaegar and Cersei are going to be right about something?
Let me say this. I will say that George R. R. Martin has spoken about the House Dayne words being important. That certainly Arthur Dayne could know that, and he does wield Dawn. So I will retract a little bit and say that he may know a little bit more. I don't necessarily know if he knew all the complete plans of Rhaegar or not. He could have thought he was crazy for all we know. Probably not, because he defended his kids. But I just want to say that because he does have Dawn in the books, and in the show that's kind of like, I don't know why I made that noise, by the way. But sorry, other question.
Well, let's just quickly. So we've got Cersei. Is George going to use the fact that we think Rhaegar and Cersei are wrong about everything to kind of blindside us? I think that Rhaegar's interpretation of events was wrong, but his belief in the prophecies was right, if that makes sense. And I think that's the kind of twist in it. Cersei, is she wrong about everything? I think, again, she is She's wrong about her interpretation of, say, the Valonqar prophecy, but she's right about the fact that it is going to come true. Maggy the Frog, I personally think, is one of the few people we should take very, very seriously in terms of her seeing the truth. So I think she's right to take that prophecy seriously.
You know what's interesting, Robert, is like, for example, hard truths, things that you're not willing to accept. I think Cersei knows. Cersei knew she may be right, but she's been in quite a bit of danger, right? So it's really interesting. This goes back to the whole self-fulfilling bit, and actually, if it's fate, if you make your own destiny or not. It's really hard to say she was completely wrong or Rhaegar was completely wrong, because there are parts of it that are right. So that's kind of where I'm at with it too. It's like George doesn't want us to get a full grasp on any of this. That bastard.
No, not until the very end. Egohugger, $5. Thank you so much. Saying no questions tonight, just my usual cash. Well, thank you very much, and just my usual chance to say my favorite name in the community, Egohugger. So thank you so much for that. Let's go on to a bunch of questions from my patrons about the whole Prince that was promised Azor Ahype issue. Now, Kyle, I will throw to you first. As Azor Ahype, you are an expert in Azor Ahype. Let's just clear up something. Natalie Donald asks, are the Prince that was promised and Azor Ahype the same thing? Because Melisandre uses them interchangeably, but are they the same thing?
Azor Ahype and Azor Ahype Reborn are different, right? So yeah. This is kind of where we got to go with it. Who is the real prince that was promised? The prince that was promised is Azor Ahype Reborn, Robert. There was an original Azor Ahype, right? The first Azor Ahype, and then there's Azor Ahype Reborn, who is the prince that was promised. Are you on me with that?
Yeah, that's what I believe. To a degree. I will give a little twist on that in a moment.
And I think that the last hero we can remove the last hero possibly from that. Because here's the thing. We actually spoke about this last night on stream, me, JR, and Gemma. Here's what I personally believe about it. I'm just going to throw this out there. I believe that there will be someone that is interpreted as Azor Ahype or Azor Ahype Reborn. I think that person is going to be Jon Snow. However, I think there's multiple characters that are going to have Azor Ahype-like transformations. Davos Seaworth, Sandor Clegane, Jaime Lannister, other characters that will have this epiphanic moment or moment of transformation where they become their kind of final form or that person they were meant to be. So it's really hard for me to say yes completely, but that's kind of where I'm at with it, Robert. I think that Azor Ahype Reborn and the prince that wasn't promised are the same person.
Okay, so very quickly, just in the chat, I saw that Kraken Tacos is back, having changed the username back. It's great to see you, Kraken Tacos. My take on this is, yes, I agree completely. So we get the original characters who are these characters lost in the mists of time. We've got Azor Ahype, we've got The Last Hero. There are various other ones from Essos who've got similar roles. And my take is that those were probably all referring to the same thing, but the stories have been passed down in different cultures and they've ended up slightly different and they're telling different aspects of the story. So that's what we've got in the past. In the present day / the future, we've got a few other prophecies, which are these kind of looking forward things. We've got Azor Ahype Reborn, which obviously has come from this Azor Ahype tradition, and we've got the prince that was promised, which is another of these kind of prophecies looking forward. Again, I think that the whole what happened before is what's going to happen again situation happening here is that we've got these two prophecies, the prince that was promised and Azor Ahype, who are going to be talking about the same set of events, but probably talking about the same person. But I am convinced that we will, once the show is finished, once the books are finished, once everything, we will still be arguing about the identity of Azor Ahai. We will still be saying this person was or that person was. I don't think we're going to have a definitive answer where we'll say everything added up to it being Jon or everything added up to it being Dany. I think that we'll still have people with different opinions of it, and we will therefore be able to attach different labels to them as we personally see fit, because that is the nature of prophecy. It is not cut and dried. So that's my personal take, and I know that annoys a lot of people.
I have to jump in here again, Robert. Azor Ahai is an archetype, and then Lightbringer is a decision, like a decision, or because sacrifice requires a decision that has to be made. Would you agree, Robert?
Well, sacrifice does, yes, but that sacrifice is also an archetype in this concept.
Right. So then we're getting even more complicated. We need to talk about the hero's journey one time. Yeah, so that's, you know, chat has some amazing thoughts on this too. But yeah, I think it applies to multiple people, Robert. I think that one person will be seen as the main Azor Ahai. We will argue because many people will have sacrificial type of heroic type of style moments, like a Jaime Lannister, like a Daenerys, like a Davos, these people will have their own end game moments where they discover who they truly are, and they have to make a decision that ultimately affects if they live or die.
And on that vein, then, that various people will have Azor Ahai kind of symbolism to them that might take on some of characteristics of Azor Ahai. Linda Pursuta, a patron, was asking about the idea that Sam might be Azor Ahai. He's going to have Heartsbane, perhaps, which could help bring the dawn. Is he going to take this kind of Howland Reed in the way that, if we interpret the Tower of Joy the way that the show did, in the way that Howland Reed was the person to do the first blow on Arthur Dane, and then Ned finished him off? Is it going to be the same with the Night King, that we get Sam doing the first blow and then Jon finishing off? What do you think in terms of Sam? Is Sam going to be one of those characters who is going to have an Azor Ahai feel to their story?
I don't think so, but I think he's one of the character. He's like the glue, like a Tyrion Lannister, a Davos, and Sam. Those people that are Bran can even be considered among these characters. A character that is going to be in the middle of all of these other characters that is going to affect them with really important information, and that's kind of what Sam is going to be doing. To go back on just some tinfoil there for a second, Robert. This is show only, but when Bran gives Arya the dagger, he says it's wasted on a cripple. That dagger was meant to kill Bran in Game of Thrones, in the books and in the show, right? I think that what we've seen, I think that Arya and Jon are both going to have to kill Bran and the Night King at the same time. I think it's going to happen at the God's Eye. I have a video on it. If all of you want to go check out what I think, why I think the God's Eye is so important, but I think that it could possibly be Arya. And I know it sounds a little crazy, but imagine how sad that would be, right? And Bran knowing that after all the change that Arya has went through, that she's able to make that decision because of the journey she's made. But it needs to happen, right? Imagine the Night King getting a hold of Bran's consciousness and body. That would be bad, I think. So I don't know. That's just some tinfoil, because we were talking about two people possibly, taking out the Night King. I actually think that Jon is definitely going to be the one to do that. Whether he lives or dies is up for debate. I think that Arya could be that other person.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in the books, personally, I honestly can't see George R. R. Martin ending this with a big battle between the bad guys and the good guys, and that's how we're going to reach our final solution. That's not, for me, what's going to happen. Similarly, Sam, I see him, I think it was Kraken Tacos, actually, who I was referencing a moment ago, in the chat saying Sam equals Sam Wise, Gamgee. Yes, yep. The language there is very clear, in my view. He's very much that character, and that is in terms of convinced he's going to survive to the end, and he is going to be the symbol of the new world going forward. This person who is always good. If you can think of anyone who is good through this, he is probably right up there. He is going to be the symbol with Gilly of building a new future. So I think that's what it is. I do not personally think that he's going to end up in the middle of a battle swinging Hearthbane around and killing people. That's just not what he's about. But let's move on to another question.
Sam is a wizard.
Exactly, but he's a wizard in the sense that he will get to understand how some bits of magical mechanics work, perhaps including things like Valyrian steel. But we're going off on a slight tangent with Sam. So let's bring this back. So I saw LML was in the chat. Hi LML, good to see you. This is a question that I would love you to give a clever answer to in the chat as well. And I'm going to throw it to Kyle, because I suspect that he may well have some thoughts too. Juliet O'Connor, what do you think? This is talking about Azor Ahype. What do you think the numbers 30, 50, and 100 might symbolize in the Azor Ahype myth? So for those who don't know, this is when the Lightbringer is being forged. First time he tries it, he sort of forges it for 30 days, doesn't work, then 50 days. And then finally it's 100 days before it works. And that final one is what it works. So the question is, do the numbers have any historical or literary significance that might be meaningful for the series themes? Kyle, did you have any thoughts on that one?
No, I don't. I think it's meant to confuse us. George's, I don't think the actual numbers mean anything.
I think to a degree, I think you're right, and I see LML has immediately cracked his knuckles and is getting to it, which is fantastic. I think that I can hazard a guess to a couple of things. 30, if you're talking historical or if you're talking literary, 30, of course, is like a month, a moon cycle, and
Al likes moons. We can.
Well, exactly. It's also if you take, say, something like the Bible, that is often used within the Bible as a time and number to signify a coming into power. So, for example, Jesus started his ministry at the age of 30. King David became king at the age of 30. I think Joseph, he became a sort of effective overlord of Egypt at the age of 30. So it's a sort of a coming in of power. 50, I've no idea about. I'll be honest about that one. 100 is more of a kind of a complete number. This is an age. So it's a century. It's a period of time. In the same way that if you take 1,000, it's the same kind of feel. It's a millennium. And this is why it's so important that when you look at the number of Lords Commander of the Night's Watch, you suddenly find that they're rapidly approaching 1,000. And the kind of implication is that is reaching its age. It's the age of the Night's Watch is coming to an end. So,
well, what's interesting, Robert, is the number 1. I mean, it is a oneness. But if you add a 0 and 0 to 1, if we separate the numbers, do you think that is more important? The number 100, when you add 2 zeros together with 1?
And when you multiply it by 10 or 100, I think it makes it important. Yeah.
See, I don't know. It could be significant. You know, like, for example, the things that you just spoke about, how many things in the story can we go and like try to reference to other things that are like not necessarily even going to matter? Like, oh, like, you know, like obviously the story of Jesus Christ is important because John gets assassinated and whatnot. But I mean, I don't necessarily know if these numbers really mean something, but they could. I mean, George's story is so incredibly complex. It could be like this secret to all of it. Who knows?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we're probably pushing it here. I will highly recommend that you look at LML's musings in the chat if you want a slightly more intelligent answer to that. But I saw Maura Lee. Thank you again. This is $20 for LML and JR in the chat. So LML JR, I will try and get in contact with you in the next day or so and try and distribute the Maura Lee love to you as well. And we had one more super chat that I'm just going to pick up on from Joy Propst. $5. Thank you so much. My question: in the books, doesn't Varys remove the tongues of his little birds? If so, how can they report back to him? Excellent question. Perhaps he teaches them to write. I think he doesn't remove the tongues of all of them. I would have to have a look at the detail of that one, I have to say. But they there are two parts to this. He has the children who are his little birds, but his informant network is much wider than that. So there are a couple of different levels to this. So he gets his information in. They often run errands for him rather than just getting information. So Kyle, is this something you've studied in particular?
Varys and the Little Birds?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, is this in relation to prophecy? Is this important towards prophecy?
I think it's just a random question.
Yeah, I mean, how did they communicate with Varys?
Yeah.
I mean, Varys is incredibly intelligent. They can, I'm sure they can read and write. I mean, or if he teaches them that, the little kids. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's entirely one of the possible ways. And I think there was some that he wouldn't cut out.
Or just verbally acknowledging, like him asking a question and them nodding yes or no. Like that's
exactly. Let's move this one on to the Dragon Has Three Heads prophecy. Torsten D says, hi, Robert. This isn't really a question, but an update from last week when we were talking about Rhaegar and Lyanna and Elia and things like that. Torsten's saying, I now see that the dragon must have three heads, more from George R.R. Martin's perspective, as a hint for the reader that Rhaegar was motivated to have another child. Therefore, it might not have any effect on the books or season 8 in the end, because it already had an effect on the past. Yeah, I think that we have to remember George R.R. Martin. I agree that we have to look at it from George R.R. Martin's perspective, but he works these things on many levels. And it will, its primary driver at the time, we shouldn't interpret it as being like this magnificent prophecy that's there. This was Rhaegar trying to get some kind of completion of what is a Targaryen ruling, invading power. There must be three of them. This is their kind of, this is their sigil, the three-headed dragon, and so on. So that was what he was trying to achieve. It's not a prophecy that says, in order for the prince that was promised to be effective, the dragon must have three heads. That's not what we're looking at. But I think we will see the dragon has three heads taking a number of different thematic turns over the course of the next couple of books. So, for example, one thing we will see increasingly in the Winds of Winter is the fact that we've got Dany and we've got Aegon or Fagon and we've got Jon, and that makes three people who are or are pretending to be or are secretly Targaryens, which makes three heads of the dragon. So there's the number of layers to this. There also are three dragons who therefore have three heads. So there are a number of different layers to this that we have to think, and I wouldn't put it past George R.R. Martin to have three people riding those dragons, but they do not, as he himself has said, and we often forget, they do not necessarily all have to be Targaryens.
Yeah, really yeah, just really interesting. There's mythic story structure, Robert, the hero's journey. There's 3 acts. So the beginning, the middle, and the end, really interesting. And one thing that I like to think about with this, that's really interesting, and if we're looking towards Jon Snow being this prince that was promised character, body, mind, and spirit is also the Holy Trinity. So something that's really interesting. Howland Reed was at the Tower of Joy, correct? He was there physically in person. So he was there in body. Mind, let's go show version first, and then because it would probably go down differently in the books. But then we got mind, right? So we got Samuel found information at the Citadel that that Lyanna and Rhaegar were an item, and then Spirit Bran teleports himself there in the Weirnet, and he's there. So the confirmation of the person that is going to save Westeros, or the person that was hidden as this character, can be confirmed by 3 people. That's also a thing, right? So that's kind of the one I like the best. It's you can pick your own adventure with that. You can say it's 3 people. You can say it's 3 different events. You can say it's 3 decisions. It applies, like you said, Robert, in so many different ways, honestly.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that 3 is a very important number within this, because it's a very important number in everything that we do, from religion with the Holy Trinity to telling a good joke. If you ever look at the study of how to tell a good joke, the number 3 is very important. Let's move on to some other questions from my patrons. We will go through these reasonably quickly, I think. Maura Lee was asking about the Doom of Valyria, and Daenerys the Dreamer having this vision of the Doom of Valyria. Would I consider that a dream or prophecy that was true, because if they had not acted on it, their house might not have survived? Yes, I think it was a true vision of the future. I think that these are slightly different things in terms of prophecy. This, I think, was a view of the future that that they acted on. I think it would have still been true if they hadn't acted on it, if that makes sense. Then Daisy Lancaster comes up with a question about Patchface that I think that Kyle, I will throw to you, because I know that you were talking about Patchface, I think, on a live stream just a few days ago. The question about Patchface is, do you think he could be a servant of the drowned god?
I mean, he could be
let me finish this one, Carl, before then I'll let you just pick up on this one. She says Patchface has been the only one in the Song of Ice and Fire to be right every single time. What are your thoughts? Can we trust him? So I'll just put it to you, Patchface, what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly quite accurate, isn't he, Robert? Yeah, he could be the physical representation of the drowned god. You know, we often talk about who can be the 7 that represent the faith of the 7. You know, there could be, you know, Bran could be the Great Other or R'hllor. There could be these actual people that are the divine representations of these actual gods within a Song of Ice and Fire. If there is a character that is representation of the drowned god and speaking prophetically, I think it could be Patchface. However, I think Euron is going to try to become that person. So that complicates matters, because Euron is, if you've read the Forsaken chapter, doing some pretty incredibly awful things. And he just may, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say. It's either Euron or Patchface. So yeah, Patchface is really interesting. I don't necessarily, the way he speaks is definitely more accurate than Melisandre, would you say, Robert?
Personally, no, I wouldn't, but no? Carry on.
I don't know. We spoke about it last week, and I got convinced by my compatriots. So, yeah, I don't know. That's all I got.
Well, okay. I mean, so I'm being slightly cheeky, perhaps. I think that I would. I wish I had. Just before we went live, I had a whole load of his prophecies that I was going to quote. I think that out of all of the people who do prophecies, his are the most vague. And I think, yes, we can interpret them and say that they are true or not, but I think that says more about the way that we interpret them, and how useful or important they are. So is he the drowned god incarnate? No, I don't personally think so, because George R. R. Martin said we're not going to see the gods. Is he working for the drowned god? No, because I don't personally think that the drowned god as an entity exists. I think that he is somebody who has come up effectively from the dead and has been sort of reborn, and this has sent him mad under the sea, and that has given him visions, but his visions are very much based on his world view, and they're always about under the sea this, under the sea that, and they're about colors of bubbles and things that we could interpret in many different ways. I think that they're true. I think he's seeing things that are true, but the way he's saying them are so vague. For me, it takes it beyond useful.
Red wedding window, Robert. Fool's blood, king's blood, blood on the maiden's thigh, but chains for the guests and shades for the bridegroom. I. That's my favorite one because I think that's in reference to the red wedding. But that's for us to interpret, like you're saying.
It is, and I would agree that probably is. I think he did see that in the same way that Dany, I think, saw it figuratively happen when she was in the House of the Undying. So I think that he did see it. But is that a useful prophecy? Not really. Nobody could take that and say, oh, do you know what's going to happen up there in Riverrun? Something terrible. We better go and stop that. That's not there. It's merely somebody who's seen something and is babbling incoherently about it. Sorry, I know there are many patch-faced theorists out there who think he's really important. I
don't think he's important, yeah.
Okay, let's quickly pick up on a couple of super chats. Sword in the Darkness, $10. Thank you so much. Just for the sake of tinfoil, love every super chat that starts with that, so thank you. What if the three heads of the dragon is like a photo negative, and it will be Dany and her two brother husbands, Aegon and his other brother, Aegon? Okay, good tinfoil. If you're suggesting that Dany will marry the two of them, well, I think that the plan from Illyrio and co is for her to marry Aegon/Fagon, and I think that there will certainly be her falling in love with Jon in the books in the same way that it happens on the show. Are the three of them going to be turning up and each riding dragons and doing the equivalent of the conquering of Westeros? No, I do not think that's going to happen. So I think that, yes, there is some sort of imagery there, as I said a moment ago, about the three sort of Targaryens, but I do not think it's an exact mirror image. Kyle, did you have any thoughts on that? I'm just going to try and find that we had a couple of other super chats, but did you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think Aegon is Fagon, and I think Dany is going to roast him alive.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I think that she is going to show him up for not being a Targaryen, and I think that the way that is going to happen is by him probably trying to get onto a dragon, and it's not going well. So Lady Octavius says, can we talk about the young girl from Dawn in Ariane's The Winds of Winter chapter? Who has green dreams? Do you think there is any significance with that? I think this is sort of, but not huge significance. I think that the fact is that green dreams can occur across Westeros. We're not just thinking that these are things that are up there in the north. One of the things that is very apparent to me, that as I've been doing my Traveller's Guide to Westeros, is quite how often the First Men blood is dotted around Westeros. Incidentally, also particularly in the west of Dawn, the families who are around there have got a lot of First Men blood in them. So do I think it's significant? Well, yes, it's significant, but I don't think it's going to be so significant in the plot as to actually change things. I think it's just one of these extra layers of detail that George R.R. Martin throws in there. And we had one from Dawn Anna Nickel. Thank you so much. Not a prophecy, but a theory. What about there must always be a Night King? I think it may be Benjen. The children got it right with him. Must there always be a Night King? No, I think that The others are created beings. Certainly on the show, we've seen it already. I think it's also going to be very similar in the books. The others are created beings, so there does not always have to be a thing. There was a time before there were the others. There was a time, therefore, before the Night King. There does not always have to be a Night King. So for my money, I do not think that's the case. Might they try and make somebody new into an other, into the Night King, Night's King? Well, quite possibly. And I think that Benjen will have a role in the books in a way that is probably more significant than we've seen it on the show, because on the show, I think he's largely taking up the Cold Hands route, Cold Hands and Benjen not being the same in the books. Kyle, did you have any thoughts on either of those two questions?
Yeah, I don't think there always has to be a Night King, because I think at the end of the story, I think most magic will be gone. I don't think there's going to be any White Walkers, any dragons, any direwolves. Sorry, people. I think that there will be humanity. And I think that we hear Daenerys make the big wheel speech. The wheel's going to be broken. That's, in the end, something has to change. Now, I certainly understand the people that are going to make the arguments that history is going to repeat itself and that there's going to be this huge bittersweet ending and it's going to be so terrible. I just don't think it's going to go that route. I think that these things aren't going to repeat themselves again, and that's where George is headed. So I don't think there is going to be another Night King.
Yeah, agreed. Let's quickly go with something from my patrons. Wonderdog, aka 26 Art Girl. How much can we rely on fever dreams? So these aren't. I think that the main example here is Ned's fever dream about the Tower of Joy. These aren't prophecies. These are, in my view, or that was, in my view, very literally a dream while he had a fever. And that means that he was seeing things, that the messages that he was getting were kind of echoes of the truth, echoes of his memories. And there is therefore truth in them, but we shouldn't take it as literally the truth. So the idea that there were blue flower petals in the air doesn't necessarily mean that it's the truth. The fact that he single-handedly pulled down the Tower of Joy, we shouldn't necessarily take that as the truth. The exact things that the King's Guard said to him when he was there, we shouldn't take that as exactly the truth. But we should take the symbolism of what they've said. We should take the thought, the feeling of what happened there, and try and say, well, that must be based on something true that happened. So it's not prophecy. It's a very human thing that was going on there, in my view.
It's really you said that, Robert, because it's a fact that our brains actually reconstruct former memories and can reconstruct them and make things that happened slightly different. So I think onto what you're saying, what all of what we're seeing with Ned in that dream may not be accurate.
Yeah, I think you're right. Marvin Martin, thank you so much for another super chat. Prophecy makes you feel significant. Was Rhaegar's reading personality or prophecy research? If the latter, what started his belief? So what we hear is that Rhaegar, when he was young, he read lots. He read huge amounts. People joked about how much he used to read. And then suddenly he read something apparently which changed his mind and made him believe that he was the prince that was promised. So the question is was it his reading personality? Was it about prophecy? I think that he grew up, first of all, we have to say he grew up in this atmosphere where the prophecy had been made that from the line that came down through his parents would come the prince that was promised. And for a long time, I think until he was something like 15, people in the chat, I'm sure somebody clever will know this off the top of their head, he was the only child of his parents. So for a long time, he was the focal point of that prophecy of the prince that was promised. And at that actually quite impressionable age, I think it's entirely likely that he would have read something. He was corresponding with Maester Aemon up at the wall, who obviously knew about this. And if he read about this prophecy, then he would probably have thought it was about him, if that makes sense. So it was only a bit later that he then started to think, well, maybe it wasn't necessarily just about him, because by that time, Viserys had come along, and by that time, he was having children, and actually the pool of people who might be, according to that prophecy, who might be the prince that was promised was a lot wider. So I think that, for me, that was what was happening.
People are bringing up Summerhall, which is a great point. He was, born during this incredible event of sadness and just this terrible event. So for him to read the smoke and salt part and interpret that, or whatever he read, definitely that's probably why. I think Summerhall was a big part of that.
Yeah, I would agree. And again, if Maester Aemon, who believed on the basis of Summerhall that Rhaegar was the prince that was promised, if he wrote and said that, then that could well be the thing that Rhaegar read that made him change his mind. We don't know, but that's one of the possibilities.
Which would make the interesting theory that Jon is Lightbringer, him being with the Night's Watch being the sword in the darkness, all that symbolism lining up.
Yeah, exactly. Incidentally, when I get time, Maester Aemon is a character that I'm going to do a video on, because the amount of times just going through all of this kind of theory that I come back to him and his role up there, rejecting the crown because they offered him to make him king and he rejected it, said, no, my place is at the wall. What was going on with him? He was up there with Bloodraven for a time. He conversed with Rhaegar. He is the center of a lot of stuff that we haven't unpicked yet. So there's a video coming at some point. It might be the other side of season 8, it has to be said, but there's a video coming at some point about him.
He's my favorite non-POV character. Like, I wouldn't say, I guess, can we call him a minor character? Anyways, I love Maester Aemon. My fave.
Yeah, absolutely. Martin, again, thank you so much. What did Jenny of Oldstone say to convince so strongly of these prophecies? George R. Martin's end is human speciest and Westeros socialist. I will admit I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that last bit, but so Jenny of Oldstone's brought the Woods Witch, who many people, including myself, believe later was the ghost of High Heart, to court with her, and it was the Woods Witch who made the prophecy about the prince that was promised. And to be honest, my own view is that she didn't actually have to say huge amounts to the Targaryens, who already have this doctrine of exceptionalism, this feeling that they are different and better and superior. If somebody came to them and said, you know what, prophecy is about you, somebody in your line is going to save the entire world, I think they would just lap it up. I think that that's all it took, is somebody coming and telling them another way that they were special. But yeah, perhaps other people are slightly nicer to the Targaryens than I am. Let's go with Pegleg Pete, question on Patreon, saying, besides prophecies, are there any curses on a person or family line that we should be aware of? And this is connected to, I think, Lost in My Imagination over on Twitter. I just very briefly saw talking about Cersei's prophecy, the Valonqar prophecy. Is it actually a curse? So, Kyle, are there any curses here that we need to be thinking about?
Harrenhal, perhaps. I mean, the dark energy of what happened at Harrenhal, just staining that area forever. That people seem to believe that. I think that would probably be the best one. Or we can interpret it, what happened to the Night King, as a curse. Let's say if it's also true in the books, that would be, I mean, him basically losing his ability to communicate. We know in the book Scroth, they are able to speak their icy language, but certainly could be just trying to have mutually assured destruction where he's gonna get his goal or die trying. I mean, I don't know if I'd want to be stuck in an icy body for 8,000 years or however long it actually is. So Those two jump out to me. Harrenhal, the Night King.
Yeah, I think I would agree with both of those. I would add into that Lost in My Imagination. Yes, I think you could interpret the Valonqar prophecy, the wider one that Maggy the Frog did, as being a curse, because there weren't actually many good things in there. You could also potentially count Miri Mazdur's what she said to Dany as a bit of a curse. And I also, going deeper back into history, I do have a thought in my head that perhaps what happened with the Starks was a curse. I think that the fact that you get, if you agree with me that the Starks, after they die and they're buried down there in the tombs of Winterfell, if this means that their spirits are trapped there until they are called upon to serve, to fight for the living against the dead, that is in and of itself a sort of curse, because those spirits can't rest yet. And I think that is, or the question that raises for me is, what might the original Starks have done to prompt that curse, if you like? Is it to do with, in the books, the Night's King, who may well have been a Stark? Who knows? But this is a lot of different sort of ideas. The fact is that there aren't many specific curses. There are, in the world of Ice and Fire, we get lots of prophecies. We get lots of bits of magic.
In the chat, Robert, could grayscale maybe?
Grayscale could be. It was intended more as a weapon than a curse.
Definitely.
But it could now be interpreted perhaps as a bit of a curse. I think that there's a good chance that that affects some people more than others. It was meant to be affecting the Valyrians, and I think that it clearly has some, I think quite clearly has some way of impacting more on those perhaps with Valyrian blood than other diseases do. So we learn of at least one Targaryen who died of it. Shireen obviously has got some Valyrian blood in her. So there is a possibility that impacts more on those with Valyrian blood. And yes, everyone says Garen's curse. The fact that it's called a curse, I don't think necessarily it means that it is a curse. I think that it was a weapon, but it was a weapon that had long-running implications, in the same way that you might drop, heaven forfend, drop a nuclear bomb somewhere and it has long implications. You might talk about the curse of a place that has nuclear fallout, that kind of thing. We've got about 2 or 3 more questions. I'm going to try and wrap up, I think, in the next 10 minutes or so, because Kyle, I know you've got to go quite soon.
Yes, sir.
But Charlie Colness, you did a super chat earlier and just queried whether your question is going to be answered over from Patreon. It is. We're getting to that now. Saying, this has been going around my head for a long time, saying there must always be a Stark in Winterfell, which personally I don't think is a prophecy. I think that is a saying which is tied into the idea that the Starks must remain there. So I think it was a little bit of trying to an attempt to get control.
The crypts.
Now, the question is, who is next in line? Are the Starks after this generation going to die out? And I think is entirely possible. I would agree with you here that it's entirely possible that House Stark will end during this story we've got here, because it was quite small to start with. Benjen, I think, is a goner. He's not going to return to be Lord. Ned's obviously gone. Rob is obviously gone. Rickon's gone in the show. He will, I suspect, also go in the books. Arya is not going to return and run Winterfell. Who else have we got? Jon is going to be revealed to be actually a Targaryen, not a Stark, so he's certainly not going to be. Bran is going to be sucked up into the Weirwood network, and that leaves just Sansa. Sansa, I think, will probably end up marrying to merge with another family and create a new dynasty. I think that well, yeah, I think that's top of my list. I think that Sansa, therefore, in the same way that at the end of the Wars of the Roses, we had House York and House Lancaster merged to create a new dynasty. I think that the time of the Starks has ended. They will have done their bit, their role in history to be protecting against the return of the others. So I think, yeah, there's a good chance that House Stark may well.
Can I jump on that for 2 seconds, Robert?
Of course you can.
Hypothetically, if Jon and Daenerys die, they have a child. Tyrion and Sansa, I believe, are the 2 perfect people to raise that kid.
That's entirely possible. That's entirely possible.
If George's original outline doesn't stand where those 5 characters survive.
I think we've moved a long way away from his original outline. It has to be said. Bridget Walsh in the chat with the super chat, thank you, saying Marvin Martin said, people trying to interpret prophecy is like trying to control the gods. How does a want for power affect that? Yeah, so I think that a desire for power, I think it plays into this idea of you get a prophecy, it can seem to add power to you because you can certainly claim that this isn't just me wanting this. For example, with Melisandre, this isn't just me wanting this. This is what the prophecy says. So I think that is her. She wants power in order to achieve the thing, and she can co-opt prophecies into it. And she also incidentally uses the same with the use of magic. She sometimes fakes magic. She can use magic, but she sometimes fakes magic because she knows that will add to her power. She says as much. People see it and then they believe her more. So that is, I think, how that works together. I've got just 2 more questions, I think, from my patrons. So I'm going to go through these ones. Karis the Beast was asking a follow-up about Jon from last week, saying, was Jon ever a prince? I said that he was born before Aerys was killed, and she said the answer here is a counter response here was when Ned arrived at King's Landing for the Battle of the Trident, Aerys was already dead because the Lannisters had sacked King's Landing, and then when Ned arrived down at the Tower of Joy, Lyanna was in a bed of blood, which means that she'd just given birth. Now, therefore, Jon was born well after that. My answer to this is no. George R. R. Martin's been very clear on the timeline between Jon and Dany's birth, that Jon was born 9 months before Dany. We know when Dany was conceived. Dany was conceived sometime around the Battle of the Trident. We don't know exactly when. So that means that Jon was born at that point. What this means is that when Lyanna was there in the bed of blood, that is not her giving birth. This is a fever afterwards. There are people who will, I'm sure, be able to say there is what was very common medieval ailment for women after giving birth to have a fever. It has got a name. I apologize, I've forgotten of it completely. My theory is that that was what was going on. She died of a fever after birth, and so Jon was born a couple of months or whatever it is before that. So when Ned got there, there was a small child, not a complete newborn. That ties in with what George R. R. Martin has told us about the timings. Now, we've just got a couple of extra super chats, and I've still got a couple of questions to go through. Kyle, I know you have to dash off. Do you mind if I carry on for about 10 more minutes after you've gone? Do you want to just quickly, if you want to bunk off, do you want to let people know where to find you? And there's all slip off quietly into the night while I finish off the live stream.
I slip off into the lands of always winter to freeze into this polar vortex. Yeah, you can find me at Azor Ahype on YouTube. I'm also, which I believe the link is in the description of this video, Robert.
Absolutely.
So some of you from the chat already know me. If you haven't, I love to. I am really huge into Norse mythology. I think George's taken a lot of influence from that. My favorite characters are Sandra Clegane, Jaime Lannister, just to name a few. So if you like theorization, I love both the book and the show, so you can come and check that out. Like I said, Azor Ahype on YouTube. And you can also find me in Geek Chat 1. I love all sorts of like Marvel, The Expanse, and stuff like that. I'm actually starting an Expanse podcast with JR next week. But yeah, you can find me at Geek Chat 1 on Facebook or Azor Ahype on all social medias. Again, a pleasure, Robert. We'll have to have you on our channel or on our live stream sometime with me and Gemma. But thanks for having me on. Prophecy is one of my favorite discussions in chat. You guys are absolute gasoline. While Robert was talking, I was trying to listen to him and pay attention to what he said, but also pay attention to what all the awesome stuff that you guys were saying. So you guys rock. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, absolutely. And I second that about the chat. There's been some really, really interesting stuff going on in the chat today. But Kyle, thank you so much. I've really appreciated having you on. Guys, please do go and check out Azor Ahype, the channel, as well as all of the other stuff. He's there on Facebook and Twitter and all the usual places. So please do go check him out.
Not Twitter so much anymore because I've been grounded from that.
Well, find him on Facebook then. He is not only an excellent YouTuber, he was also a first-rate guy, and I would highly recommend you go and check him out. Thank you, Kyle. I will love to come on your channel at some point. Just let me know and we'll sort something out.
Valor
Take care. And with that, Kyle was gone. So guys, we are back with the questions from my patrons. We also had a couple of super chats I just want to come to as well. Susan Dunkel, thank you so much. $20, that's very kind. I read Miri's prophecy about Dany being reunited with Drogo. This is Miri Mazdur as foreshadowing of Dany's death, that she will join Drogo in death, not Drogo returning to her in life. The red door being symbolic of Heaven's Gate. Yeah, that's a good way of interpreting it. I think it's, for me, I think that there's actually a very plain text reading of what Miri Mazdur was doing there, which was, Dany says, when is he going to be back with me? And she just reels off this whole series of things to which the answer is never. And so that is, for me, what she was trying to say is he's never coming back. And yes, I think you could turn that in a slightly different way and say, so what she's talking about is saying that only when you also die. But she had created it so that Khal Drogo would be alive, but also effectively brain dead, and he would be there as we saw him on the show, tragically. And so I agree. It was foreshadowing that she would be only reunited with him in death. It was also in a very plain text reading, just saying, you're never going to see him again. That's just the way it's going to work. And we had a super chat from, let me quickly flick through, Donna Daly. Are the direwolf names prophecies? Yes, absolutely. They are, well, prophecies, I think foreshadowing probably here. So it's not somebody who's come up with a prophecy that is tapped into something magical. This is the Stark children just coming up with names for their direwolf pups that foreshadows their own fate. It was one of the very first videos I did, actually, about 2 years ago, which went into this. So you can very quickly go through and you can look at Ghost, obviously, being Jon. He is going to die and return, so he's going to come back after death like a ghost does. Shaggy Dog with Rickon. Rickon's going to have a very long story, very complicated, but he's going to end up being pretty meaningless to the bigger plot, not much point to it, like a Shaggy Dog story. Grey Wind is just something which blows harsh and strong, but actually fundamentally isn't going to last. That's what Rob's fate was. Nymeria, warrior queen leading people. This is what's happening with Arya. Lady for Sansa, obviously Lady is where in the on the show. She has ended up being the Lady of Winterfell. The most intriguing one for me is Summer being Bran's direwolf. Summer obviously in some way implies that Bran is going to be bringing out or bringing people through the winter and the spring into summer. And I think that is the most intriguing one, because it's the one that we've seen the least evidence of so far. So yes, I absolutely agree that they are, I mean, not prophecies, they are foreshadowing, a slightly different thing. So I've got a couple more questions. So Jen Yu over on Patreon says, can we take the visions brought on by the shade of the evening as prophecy? If so, does that mean the Damp Hair's visions and prophecies in the Forsaken chapter about Euron becoming a god might actually come true? So we have two big moments when people use the shade of the evening, which are, it's kind of the juice of the berries of the trees outside of the House of the Undying that are set up as being quite similar to, but kind of like an opposite to weirwood trees. Dany drinks of it and then goes into the House of the Undying and has a whole load of visions that are pretty good, it has to be said. If you go through them, there are very close, certainly the first few are very close to accurately saying things, showing things that did happen, stuff that was happening elsewhere in the world or was about to happen, things that will happen, but also things that never will be. And that for me is the crucial aspect here. So they are undoubtedly these kickstarters of magic, in the same way that when Bran has the kind of the weirwood paste, that kickstarts his magic, his ability to see things. When Dany has it, that kickstarts her ability to see things. And the same in when we get the Forsaken chapter in the pre-release chapters of the Winds of Winter. If you don't know that, it's George R. R. Martin's released a few draft versions of chapters from the Winds of Winter. I've recorded, I think, all of them. I might have one more to go. I've recorded them for my patrons, so if you're interested in hearing me read them, please go check out my Patreon page. But in the Forsaken chapter, then Euron has got the Damp Hair Aerion captured, and he effectively force feeds him this shade of the evening, and he has visions including effectively Euron being on a throne and lots of gods dying dead around him and all the rest of it. So should we take it seriously? Yes, we should take it seriously, but we do not necessarily have to take it literally. In the same way with Dany's visions, some of them were visions of futures that will not be. Could have been, but will not be. So we shouldn't necessarily say that these are definitely true, but where I ended, or where I started all of this talk about prophecy, is that George R. R. Martin is all about us looking at what are the actions of people in believing in prophecy. That is what he cares about. That's what his focus is on. And the key thing here is that Euron has seen these visions and he is doing things in order to try and make them a reality. And that is what is driving, pardon me, that is what is driving the action. It is Euron's belief in them. We don't know whether they're true, as in whether they will come literally true. My guess is probably not in that exact way. But what will be literally true is Euron's drive to make them true, and that is what's going to make a huge difference. TK, thank you for the super chat. Is it just me, or does the prince that was promised have a biblical connection? I'm alluding to the prophecy about Jesus' birth, with him being the Messiah. Yeah, there's definitely an element to this. It's not a direct link, but it's this idea of the prince that was promised, or the person who's going to save the world. This is something which is, we often think of it as a fantasy trope. This person who is destined to, from before their birth, there were prophecies about them, and they're destined to save the world and all the rest of it. It's not just a fantasy trope. This is something which is out there in the way that we tell stories as civilizations. And appears not just in the Bible, but in lots of different ancient bits of literature. So yes, there's an element of that. There's an echoing of it, and I think George R. R. Martin is deliberately echoing it, but it's not a literal one for one. The Isaiah reference that you might unto us a child is given, etc. That bit has got kind of the same language feel to it, I would agree, with the prince that was promised, but so do a number of the prophecies we have about Aragorn in Lord of the Rings, for example, or indeed about Harry Potter, if you're into Harry Potter. So this as an archetype is across a number of different styles of literature. That's where I would go with that one. I've got one more question. Oh, hi, Joe Magician. Good to see you. Just coming in at the very end of this. I have got one more question, which is not related to any of what we have been talking about, but it's one from a new patron, so I'm very happy to answer it. And guys, this is your last chance to drop some questions into the chat, so I will come to them in just one moment. Legend of Peacock asked, we hear in the show a lot that you don't have the men for a siege. Do the books give a golden number for the amount of men needed to take a castle? We never see a siege except for the Rock, which was under guard. Well, we also see a siege, of course, of Riverrun on the show in the books. I love this because I'm a bit of a castle nerd. I love exploring castles and understanding how castles worked in the medieval age. George R. R. Martin has very much the same, the idea of castles in the same way that castles work in the real world, and that is that there is no golden number, because this depends, that the way that a siege works is that you prevent anyone going in or out of the castle. And that means that they can't get reinforcements. Every time somebody dies and nobody's there to replace them, they can't get food in, they can't get provisions, they can't get new arrows, they can't get anything in or out. And that's the way that you win it. Because castles are hard to storm, you would lose many, many people trying to take a castle head on. So the amount of people you need to effectively siege a castle will depend on the castle. It will depend on the terrain around it. How big is it? If you were to effectively siege Harrenhal, massive castle, you would need a lot more people than you would something that was just like a very small tower on a hill. The importance of this comes when we try and look at the geopolitical stuff in Robert's Rebellion, when we get the Tyrells, who marched the largest army in the entirety of Westeros all the way down to try and lay siege to Storm's End. Storm's End is just like on a promontory. You don't need tens of thousands of people to block the land access there. That's just not necessary. They also brought in the entire Red Wine fleet to try and blockade it by sea. Of course, Davos made his way through that, but that's because Davos was very good at sailing. But you did not need the whole of what was one of the three largest fleets in the entirety of Westeros. You did not need all of that. So the point there is that was either a strategic error or, I think, a deliberate moving of people away from the battles for what looked on the face of it as a sensible move to besiege Storm's End, but actually it was just completely unnecessary. So is there a magic number, a golden number for the amount of men needed to take castle? No, there is not. It really depends on the castle, and it really depends on the geography around it. So that's the That's the answer to that one, Legends Peacock. Thank you. Great to have you as a patron. Guys, I'm going to wrap up in just a few minutes now. Just going to pick up on a few quick questions in the chat. Misty306, hi there, saying, will there be a Valonqar in the TV show? That prophecy was not mentioned in the show. This is very true. They didn't mention it. They went through a lot of Maggy the Frog's prophecy, but they stopped just before talking about the Valonqar. That's because they wanted to focus in on this idea of the younger, prettier person who's going to take it all away from you, and get that to build Cersei's jealousy of Marjorie. So that was what they were wanting to show there. So they're not going to major on the Valonqar. I do not think that they're going to mention the Valonqar on the show. I think that that's not going to be a thing, but someone will kill Cersei. And it may be the same person. I suspect probably not, but it may be the same person who kills her in the books. So they won't go with Valonqar, but they will go with somebody killing Cersei. What have we got? Let's have a quick flick through. Jake Shepherd, thank you so much. $10. Do you think that King's Landing will actually burn, as in Dany's vision? Side note, you're doing wonderful work. Thank you. We're all lucky to have people who are willing to put so much time and love into this. That's very kind of you to say. Thank you so much. Do I think King's Landing will actually burn, as in Dany's vision? Yes. Yes, I do. I think that there are simply too many people there who have an interest in burning it. Cersei may well want to burn it. Dany keeps on talking about burning it. In the books, we've got Aegon Fagon, who is not that far from it. He's down near Storm's End. I think there's a good chance he might come up there. Obviously, we've also got, if he makes it that far, the Night King, all of the others coming down. The thing that a lot of people miss about that vision from Dany, and it was a kind of a figurative vision. I don't think it's going to be literally true. I don't think she's literally going to walk through and walk up to near the Iron Throne and then walk away again. I think that is actually trying to show that she nearly will get what she wants, but then she won't. Maybe she will even walk away from it. But the interesting thing there, if you look at it, is that showed the Red Keep throne room as having been destroyed from above. Now, you go back and have another look at this if you want to, but you will see that the ceilings are gone and all of the tops of the walls have gone. The stuff at the bottom has not. This is not somebody who's got some wildfire and it's erupted from the bottom upwards. This is someone who's fired from the top downwards. So what we're looking at is that having been destroyed by dragon fire. So that's just a thing to think about. I think that may well be the case of what happens. I think King's Landing definitely will go. I think that the Iron Throne definitely will go. The whole idea of what everybody was fighting for, the Game of Thrones, the idea of the struggle for power, this has to be shown to be destroyed. The Iron Throne is, in Lord of the Rings language, the One Ring. It has to be destroyed because everybody is just fighting each other to try and get hold of it. And that's where it has to end and go. So that has to symbolically go. And I think in order for that to happen, King's Landing will also be largely destroyed. Couple of quick questions. Andrew K, with the show, if the Night King's endgame is the God's Eye and the Isle of Faces, why would he go south of it to King's Landing, coming from the north? Yeah, in the show, I like the idea that they will have the Isle of Faces on the show. I am still not convinced they will. They've not mentioned it, really. In the books, it's there mentioned from really early on. We know that this is going to be really important. On the show, they don't really mention it. I think that they will just not. They have bigged up 3 places. This is trying to get into the showrunners' minds here. But in the titles, all the way through, there are 3 places that I think have appeared in the title sequence of every single time, because they shift it around. Sometimes the camera goes over to Meereen, if that's where Dany is, sometimes up to Riverrun or whatever, but there are 3 things that have always been there. It's been the Wall, there's been Winterfell, and there's been King's Landing. Those are the focus of the minds of the showrunners, that this is where they're thinking of as being important. So we've seen the Wall fall on the show. Clearly, the Army of the Dead is going to reach Winterfell quite soon, but then after that, heading down towards King's Landing, because I think that the Isle of Faces as a concept is not going to... They might bring it in. I hope they bring it in, but I'm not 100% convinced that they will. It has to be said on the show. Let me see if I can get one last quick question in. Let's go with this one. Kelso Sunshine. I'd like to see Robert Strong, this is the Zombie Mountain, kill Cersei, but he's no Valonqar unless some of his pieces are. That's excellent thought. Yes, he's not. He is the elder brother. I would also, I think it would be quite touching, but I think that his end will come, not in a kind of Clegane Bowl way necessarily, but his end will come with a confrontation with the Hound, with his brother, because this is where Sandor's arc goes. He started out with his face burned from his brother. That's where his fear of fire has gone. And this is where, through his character arc, he is becoming more of a good person, less of the cynic, and he is slowly overcoming his fear of fire. We see it in all its glory when we get the Battle of the Blackwater. Then he faces up against fire and conquers his fear of fire when he's facing up against Beric Dondarrion. Then we see him moving to a position where on the show he's looking into the flames. Later on, I suspect we will get to the point where he is wielding fire. He is going to come full circle in this, and I think that that full circle leads him to a confrontation with the Mountain. I don't think it's going to be a big Clegane Bowl thing. It might be on the show, but I don't think it's going to be a big Clegane Bowl thing. I think actually it's going to end up with pity on behalf of the Hound, because what's the one thing that we know kills whites, even science whites, that that Qyburn has created? Fire. Who might be wielding fire? The Hound. So I think with that, guys, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you so much. This has been really good chat. I've really enjoyed the comments and questions we've been having there. Thank you so much for the super chats. Thanks to Kyle for coming on. Please do go check out his channel. Just in terms of stuff coming up on my channel, I'm going to be getting back into that series about Robert's Rebellion and the tourney at Harrenhal and the Tower of Joy. If you are at all interested in me reading or hearing me read classic science fiction and fantasy stories, I have just started on my second channel, The Well Told Tale. I have just started reading The Call of Cthulhu, which is a fantastic story and has got so many links across to A Song of Ice and Fire, thematic links. I'll probably pick up on that one maybe next time round. Please do go and check that one out. If you're at all interested in supporting this channel, if you want to get access to some extra stuff I do for my patrons, if you want to get priority questions, as you've probably seen from this one, I always give my patrons priority in terms of questions for live streams, please do go and check out my Patreon page. It's patreon.com/InDeepGeek. There should be a link down there in the description. Thank you so much to my moderators. Thank you everyone who's been watching. I shall see you again this time next week. Take care.